was redeemed Storytime. How about the summer of 1998? Oh, wow. Okay. Storytime is one of the features on my on my channel. If you have channel points, you can hear stories. Sure. Okay, summer of 1998. I got married in the summer of 1999, so I would have to back up a year. So in 98, yeah, okay, so the summer of 98 was right before I moved to North Carolina, which is where I live now and have lived ever since. So yeah, the summer of 98, okay, it was May of 98. I came down here, I flew down on an airplane, and I had a job interview. I worked at a newspaper, or was going to work. I worked for a newspaper up in Chicago, and I was applying for a job at a newspaper in North Carolina, and I flew down here in May and was interviewed and then moved in the summer of 98. And I had to, well, I opted to. I sold everything I had. I sold all my furniture and stuff, or left it with my roommate, because I didn't want to rent a moving van, and I didn't have that much stuff anyway. And so I piled what I had into my car, and I had two cats and some boxes of stuff, and I had mailed some boxes ahead to arrive because I had arranged. I got the job, and I arranged for an apartment to live in, or a little house to live in, and so I sent some boxes ahead through the UPS service, and had some stuff in my car. And my best friend, was getting married. So she was in Ohio and I was in Chicago. And so I drove to Ohio. I was the maid of honor at her wedding with my cats. My cat stayed, she had a spare room, and my cats and I stayed in the spare room. And I attended her wedding, and then I drove from Ohio down to North Carolina, which I think is like, I don't remember exactly how far it is. It's like a 10 or 12 hour drive or something, and I drove all the way down to North Carolina, and I think that was in June, and moved into my little place and started my new job, where I was a newspaper editor. I had been a newspaper reporter in Chicago, and I did layout and design and stuff like that also. Um, but in North Carolina, I was going to be a regular editor, a copy desk editor, they call it. I wasn't really the one like editing the local news stories. I was the one involved in the editorial decisions of what went into the paper every day, because we had like a national news section, state news section, local news section. We had other people that did the lifestyles and the business sections and the sports sections. We had other departments that did that, but I was kind of in charge of like the copy desk is sort of like the overall, person that's like, or the team. There was usually two or three of us every night that were making sure that all the headlines were being written, and we did all the layout and design. That's fitting, deciding where all the stories go and which stories are going to be on which pages and all that kind of stuff. So it was a big step forward for me, because basically going from just being a reporter. I don't say just being. I mean, that's a tough job too. But from just you're writing stories and you're covering certain things, to now you're doing the layout and the headline writing and the editorial decisions and everything for like this whole large daily paper. It was a big move forward for me career wise. So that's what I was doing that summer. And it was at that newsroom, at that job, that I met my husband. He was working in the graphics/computer department. He was actually their website person. They were just switching over in 1998. This daily newspaper newsroom was just switching over from using what was called a microtext system, which had small green computer screens, to using Microsoft with actual PCs like we would think of them nowadays. And so everyone was doing training, because most people did not know, in that newsroom, most people did not know how to use a Microsoft computer system. Most people did not have email, or none of that. I had used Microsoft computers before, and that was one of the reasons they hired me, because I had used a microtext system, and I had at my previous newsroom jobs, and I had also used Microsoft computers and knew a little bit about computers. So they wanted to hire me because I would be able to help with the transition and wouldn't need any special training or whatever. I would already be familiar with it. I mean, they literally had to teach people how to point and click or click and drag. I mean, that was like a thing people had to learn. Oh my gosh. But my husband was sitting his desk, the wire desk and the city desk, and then the graphics department were all like on one side of the newsroom. So he was like 3 or 4 desks away from me. And with this transition from Microtech to Microsoft, he was also they were transitioning to having their newspaper content online. This was like the point when newsrooms were starting to put things online, and my husband was the guy who was doing their website and doing all of their programming so that their stories would go, online. He was doing the website layout and design and the updating every day of the news stories and all that kind of stuff. And he was the only one doing it. It was just him. But they didn't really have like an IT department or I guess, a website department or whatever. So he sat in the same department with the guys that were doing graphics, doing the photo stuff, because they were using like Adobe Photoshop or whatever they were using to do photos and stuff for the paper. That's how I met him. And then we ended up getting married a year later. The end. Storytime, 1998.